All right, are we set? Okay. Welcome to the Delta Independent Science Board meeting. Unfortunately, well, fortunately maybe, we're going to have a closed session for the first half hour upstairs to do a personnel matter on the new Delta lead scientist, to search for the new Delta lead scientist, and then hopefully we'll be done with that in about half an hour and reconvene. I'm sorry that wasn't clear in the original announcement, but we'll be back, and hopefully we'll have some more news on how that discussion has gone at the end of that. And then we'll recommence on the official agenda. So sorry for the interruption, but personal matters are that way. Thank you very much. There's such distance here. My apologies for us taking longer than I had expected in the closed session. Welcome everyone to the Delta Independent Science Board meeting. We have to go through our litany of changes in conflict of interest. So let's just go around the table of if there are any changes in any conflict of interest you might have.
John Weens, everything's the same.
There's a button here. If it turns red, then you're on.
Joyce Adler, no changes.
No changes.
Jay Lund, no changes.
Steve Brandt, no changes.
Tracy Collier, no changes.
There we go. All right, Liz Canuel, no changes.
Dick Norgard, no changes.
Vince Resch, no changes.
And Brian Atwater?
Brian Atwater, no. No change.
No changes for Brian Atwater.
Thank you for your just-in-time delivery. We just had a closed session on the search for the Delta new lead scientist for the Delta Science Program, which is a position that is formally a hire of USGS in collaboration with Delta Stewardship Council and lead the Delta Science Program. The Science Board has a statutory role in making recommendations on that hire, and we will have a recommendation, but it's not going to be public until after it has gone through the proper channels with USGS. So, but we will have a recommendation. Science. Next item on the agenda is Science Board Chair's report. We have quite a few things that we are starting up on, well into, and maybe even have some action items on in terms of several reviews. we'll see a draft review memo on the 2017 to 2021 Science Action Agenda, and today we have some discussion about our final review of Water Fix, EIR, EIS. Later tomorrow we'll be looking at a review memo for the Eco Restore Adaptive Management Program white paper, and we'll be looking at the status of several other thematic reviews we have on monitoring water quality. And then since we have completed our first review of Delta as the science involved in Delta as place, we'll be looking a little bit at outreach steps on that tomorrow. But tonight we will have a public presentation and discussion of that report and other items that the public or members of the Science Board would like to discuss. Then later tomorrow morning, we will have a retrospective look at the state of the Bay Delta science, a big set of reports and papers that was published in the San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Sciences Journal over the last couple of years. That's a process that happens about every 4 or 5 years. And then we will prepare for future meetings. So that's an overview of this. This is my last in-person meeting that I'm chairing before I move on to being past chair. So that's good. Let's move on then to the lead scientist report. Cliff.
So I have a pretty good list of things that I want to bring to the attention of the board. 8 items that I'd like to at least briefly try to give you a summary of that are going on that I think would be of interest to you. The first one is we had April 25th to April 27th an early career leadership workshop. This is a opportunity to get the fellows that we support both through the Science Fellows Program and through the Policy Fellows Program. You on the board have had a lot of interaction with some of our policy fellows over the years, and provide some guidance on career opportunities and career options and communications, and culminates with students going through the process of thinking through their research, coming up with a 90 to 120 second elevator type speech, and 14 of them on the last day of the workshop presented to the Delta Stewardship Council, and they did a phenomenal job. It was a really, I think, excellent communication skill development process, and the Council 201 were very, very complimentary about what they learned from these young people and felt that they really did a great job. So this is something that I think Peter Goodwin started when he was lead scientist, and I thought it was a really good idea to try to continue this, and so we basically brought 2 years worth of fellows and then the current policy fellows together, and had this event, and culminated with the presentation to the council, and then they actually spent the afternoon then looking at Poudre Creek and some of the ongoing restoration activities on Poudre Creek. And Poudre Creek's not just a creek right now, it's actually looking much like a river. So anyway, it was a good event. Second thing I wanted to highlight is that again, another activity that goes back to some of the ideas that Peter Goodwin put forward that we're now finally beginning to initiate. Peter had the idea that a upcoming review that now is finally actually starting, that was going to be done on grand challenges and opportunities in environmental engineering and science in the 21st century, that California and California's issues really fit into this, and at a national level it would be really good to be part of that dialogue, and so we provided some support for this effort. They had their first meeting of the committee, it's a committee of 18, on the 4th of May, and we did a WebEx presentation, answered some questions that they had about what we hope to get out of the process, And we will be hosting in Sacramento, I believe, or certainly in California, I think it's going to be in Sacramento, in September, the second meeting of the committee, and this will be about an 18 to 24-month process where the committee will issue another one of their Grand Challenges type books. Some of you may be acquainted with the National Academy of Sciences Grand Challenges series. They had one, for example, in 2008, I believe, on Grand Challenges in Engineering that have produced a tremendous amount of traction and guidance. And we're hoping that we can be part of this dialogue and hope that some of the California issues and some of the California challenges can be part of this this final document that they produce. And so we will stay engaged with that. Jessica Law is going to be the point person at the council to continue this interaction. I also wanted to highlight that a week from today, there's going to be a workshop at UC Davis on titled Delta Smelt Culture Program from Experiment to Reinforcement. This is a workshop that will, I think, be looking at some of the issues about the Delta Smelt, the current culturing program, and how it can be used, should be used, what are some of the scientific opportunities there, but also I think there will be some discussion as to whether or not this could actually lead to some kind of introduction into the wild. Very controversial topic, but that discussion will be held on the 18th. I wanted to highlight that 3 contracts were approved by the Delta Stewardship Council at their last council meeting in April. These 3 contracts, I think, have some very direct bearing on the Delta Science Program and should be of interest, I think, to the board. We first received the go-ahead to have another year of Science Fellows and 2 years of Policy Fellows. The Science Fellows is a 2-year award. The Policy Fellows is a 1-year award. So we have the resources to do that again next year for the Science Fellows and to continue to have some of the Policy Fellows that many of you have worked with over the past few years be recruited and put in place. We got approval for a series of projects that we've dubbed Operation Baseline, but these are basically projects that involve trying to get some of the information before the upgrade of the Sac Regional Wastewater Treatment Facility. These half a dozen or so projects really focus on some of the key, I think, measurements that would be useful to answer some fundamental science questions about how the upgrade is going to affect the Delta, how it's going to affect things like the rate of primary production of certain groups of primary producers, the nutrient dynamics, some of the key transformations of nitrogen downstream of the plant currently, and as it will change as the effluent becomes no longer ammonium dominated in inorganic nitrogen, but nitrate dominated. Will that have effect on things like harmful algal blooms? Will that have effect on things like aquatic invasive weeds? Will that have effect on some of the other types of algal blooms that would be diatom dominated, that would be more desirable? So these contracts will be initiated here shortly to begin to try to get some of the background information before that complete upgrade of the plant, which will occur in 2021. I also want to introduce a new staff member in the Delta Science Program who's here with us. He's in the back there. Ben, would you stand up? This is Ben Geske. Ben has joined us here recently. He is the addition to the staff to fill a need that we have in modeling and hydrodynamic modeling. And a lot of the kind of things that he'll be doing, we'll be looking at some of these concepts in integrated modeling, where some of the hydrodynamic models, which are pretty sophisticated for the Delta, need to be coupled to some of the other kinds of modeling that include things like food webs and nutrients and biogeochemical processes and contaminant degradation and things like that. So welcome, Ben, and hopefully you'll get to meet most of the board members during your time here. I also, wanted to bring to your attention that in April, There was a new report on sea level rise and sea level rise predictions for the state of California. I think I mentioned it briefly. I've had a chance to go over that report. It's been receiving a lot of attention here in the state. A couple things that are in the report is that they provide a probabilistic estimate of sea level rise rates along the coast of California under different scenarios for greenhouse gas buildup in the atmosphere. Most of the changes are post 2050, but they have added to the report a high-end scenario that they consider should now be added to the consideration for sea level rise ranges that we might consider. And some of the earlier projections, some of the low-level projections for sea level rise are less likely because of the rate at which greenhouse gases are currently increasing in the atmosphere. And then finally, there are two more things. The paper that I will highlight to the council later this month that I like to share with you at each of your board meetings is a paper by Maharaja et al., published in January of 2017 in the journal PLOS ONE. It is a very interesting analysis of the fish communities that are found in the edge areas or the littoral zones of the Delta. 20-year data set is now available and has been analyzed pretty thoroughly by these authors. A couple things to note is that the biomass of these fishes that are in the edge areas have more than doubled in these 20-year periods, so there's a lot more mass of fish in these areas. And in addition, the community is dominated by non-native species. So this paper, I think, is an interesting addition to a part of the sampling regime for fish that is not as well studied as is the open water or the pelagic zone. And then finally, the last item I wanted to highlight is that there was a workshop held on May 1st and 2nd at UC Davis on constituents of emerging concern and for aquatic ecosystem monitoring. Tracy, were you in attendance at that? I think you actually were one of the plenary speakers.
No.
You were a speaker, though.
No.
Anyway, I wanted to bring it to your attention. This is going to feed into some of the ecosystem monitoring. There's going to be some work to do some preliminary look-sees at some of these constituents that we don't normally sample for and measure. So some of the things like personal care products, some of the suites of organic compounds that are used in the pharmaceutical industry, for example, that we don't commonly measure. These are some of the things that would fit under this category of constituents of emerging concern. And this will, I think, begin to inform future monitoring programs within the Delta. Did you want to say anything additionally, Tracy, about the workshop?
I was just going to say that I attended that, but because some of the work that they're talking about and the approaches they're strategizing on may come before us, I made sure to be clear that I was there observing, mostly to inform our water quality review. But I was careful not to throw my own opinions in. I do that later. So.
All right, thank you. So those are, I think, are the major things that I have on my list. I'd be happy to answer any questions that any of the board members might have. Otherwise, that concludes my report.
As part of my activities as a professor, I was at a dinner that was had for the Delta Fellows, and I thought it was very useful in terms of getting people to mix. One of the good and bad attributes about science in this system is many of these young scientists will be blessed and cursed with hanging out with these same people for their entire careers. And so it's good for them to get to know each other and to expand their networks early on, because I think that's true for everybody that works in the Delta. Maybe it's not such a bad place because we tend to hang around here a long time.
One thing I should mention is that the Science Fellows part of the program requires that the awardees have both a community mentor and an agency matters, so that they get, an academic matter and an agency matter. So this gathering allowed a number of those people to get together and actually network a little bit amongst both the academic side of the ledger and the agency side. And it was very well attended by the mentors in addition to the students. And I was very pleased with that.
Good. Any questions from board members or from the public? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to the next agenda item. Review of the memo on the draft, or review memo of the draft 2017 to 21 science action agenda. I think Vince, you were pulling this together.
Yes, first can you hear me? Yes. First, I'd like to thank all of you that contributed comments on the draft science action agenda. I would emphasize that this is a draft that was put together based on those comments. And I know Joe has told me that he has a couple of items that he would like to include after we circulated them, and Brian has some comments as well. So I think at this point I'd like to kind of open it up to hear general comments. Again, let's avoid wordsmithing if we can, and see where we want to go with this next version, which will then go to the entire board. Joe, do you want to talk about your two comments?
One I forgot. The other one was actually there was another science action agenda which came up maybe 2014. So I kind of wanted to allude that to in this document, saying that there was one before, and what was the action on that one and how that has evolved into this one. So so that kind of a short comment on that would be appropriate, I think. That was one of my comments. The other one I forgot. I will dig it up again. Yeah.
Okay. Brian, do you want to comment on your?
No. But just a further thought from discussions with Lindsey today is that we could include the suggestion that if an action item doesn't easily fit in this year's shortlist, that there could be mention made that this is just 1 year's list, and that the science action takes place on geologic time scales, and therefore it would be possible that next year something that didn't make it,
The next version.
Yeah, the next version, that readers shouldn't be surprised to see their favorite topics not included, and that there's always next year or something. It's like the Mariners.
Oh, geez. Don't go there.
Does anyone else have any specific, or I should say general comments about this? We will be doing some reorganization, and it's not too late to get comments from people about that. There have been a couple of suggestions of how we might reorganize it, but one of which is organized according to the Delta plan, so that we relate it back. I have to admit that, given that Lindsey and Yumi know the Delta plan so well, I didn't see that as being too critical. There has been a note that there are some contradictions, because I didn't want to make value judgments about this until it went back to all of you to look at. So I would ask all of you to look at this one more time, and within perhaps 8 or 10 days, if you can get comments back to me, and I'll reorganize based on those. Yeah.
May we move to go forward with this, with whatever changes Vince makes, and call that the final document? It's a review. It probably needs to sooner rather than later to get to Lindsey and coworkers.
Vince, are you comfortable with that?
Yes, we've gotten some comments back unexpectedly from the science program, and we can use those in looking at some reorganization as well.
Do other people, does anyone on the board feel that there needs to be an additional look at this before we would vote on this draft document with Vince making some modest additions to continue?
I think this is, I don't think we should set a precedent for rushing through our reviews on this. It seems to me that the standard procedure of giving Vince, in this case, comments and feedbacks, making a revision, circulating that revision to the entire board for any further comments and then approval is the way we customarily do things. I don't know if this is what you're suggesting or not.
I thought maybe we'd done that already, but maybe not, so.
Well, my understanding from what Vince said was that he was going to reorganize and what we may see the next time may be rather different from this, at least in terms of organization, if not in content.
What I would actually prefer, John, is that perhaps we do a reorganization and run it by the science program for their comments before we circulate it in other words, we're looking at this as a draft that we're circulating for them to comment on what would be useful for them, and then circulate that. So in other words, we're having a kind of an intermediate step in review. Now, the question of independence may come up, so I'm willing to take other suggestions. For example, if you feel strongly that we should go through a second review before it goes to them, that's fine with me.
Did you want to make a motion, Brian? Or we'll just let this, we'll have another version of this perhaps before our June meeting that we can perhaps vote on as a final action item.
Yeah, well, I wasn't, I guess I have some concerns about doing a review and then circulating it to the reviewees before we accept it. I think in this case it's a little bit different from the kind of normal reviews we do, but I don't think we want to get into that situation where we review something and then get essentially the approval of the entity being reviewed before we finalize our review.
I wasn't talking about approval as just in terms of clarification of what this was an unusual circumstance where
Yeah.
we didn't anticipate that this would come out, but we have gotten some useful feedback, and I would like to use that in
Well, I think we should use the feedback that we've received already. I guess what I'm questioning is whether we want to go through another phase of getting the feedback before we finalize.
No, I'm not talking about getting another feedback, another session of feedback, as much as perhaps talking to them in terms of getting a clarification of what some of their questions were as I prepare that next draft to go back to all of you. Now, if you think that's a conflict, I'm certainly willing not to do that.
No, I think it's probably okay. It's similar to what we've done with some of the other entities we've been reviewing, where we have somebody come in and, in a sense, testify
I don't see it as any
before
different
us
from that,
or
yeah.
answer questions before we finalize the review.
Brian?
What would be timely for the preparers of the science action agenda? Do they need it next week, or would 1 or 2 months from now be equally good?
Yeah, one of the things I would like to with Steve coming in as chair, sometimes we've gotten really very unrealistic deadlines. Somebody saying that they need it as soon as possible is not really something that we should be jumping on. I think one of our problems with this case was we had essentially a month from when we got the science action agenda to do the review, and we couldn't get it by the whole board again. So I would ask that we be a little more temperate as more and more of these things come in.
Let's let Lindsey Correa just give you some feedback on the timing issue.
Yeah, so thank you for considering an expedited review, and we appreciate the comments that you're you're putting together and the thoughtfulness that you're taking. We've extended the public deadline from May 10th to the end of May 31st, but we are very explicit in the writing that we recognize that the board would need potentially need additional time. So right up front, we say that we recognize that the board's comments are likely to come after the public comment closes, and I think that still holds. I think we would like to hear your thoughts, and I don't think we want to wait a long time, but I think we want to hear you to feel comfortable with the comments that you're giving us, and that for those to be the highest quality to really help the agenda be the best that it can be for the science community. So I don't know if Cliff wants to add on that, but timely, but we don't need them today.
And I also want to add, the comment I was making was not about this, just in general. Whenever we've gotten a request to do something, it's always, can you do it yesterday?
Yeah, and just from a timeline perspective, this is something that I would like to complete on my watch, and that would mean the end of August, basically, from a timeline perspective.
Any further comments, discussion on the board members? Okay, we have Mark Pruner would like to comment on this agenda item. Is Mark Pruner here?
Professors, thank you.
There's a little red button.
Yeah, there you go.
We're on. Okay, thank you very much. I've met some of you, but not many of you in the past, and thank you for letting me come before you. I live up in Clarksburg. I'm a Delta resident. I'm involved in Delta governance at a variety of levels, and have a keen interest in not only the Delta as a comprehensive ecosystem, but also as a place where people live and work and have their interests. I'm somewhat aware of the history and the research, not as much as you all certainly. And I'm very interested in the establishment of Delta's place as a place as being understood and evaluated in this priority given to it in the statute, specifically by way of example, certainly not exclusive, Water Code Section 85054. That section appears on the Delta Stewardship Council website and is on the back, to the best of my knowledge, of every single Delta Stewardship Council staff member's business card. And it's that second sentence that deals with how the co-equal goals shall be achieved, which I think everybody knows. So then with all of these comments and thoughts in mind, I'd just like to offer some thoughts both as to the draft science plan and the comments on the comments. Let me state, if I may, first, that each of the 5 items that's listed as a priority in the science action agenda, and I'm referring to page Roman numeral 6. As I read those, certainly from a lay perspective, not one of those specifically or in a priority way or even incidentally attempts to honor sentence 2 of Water Code Section 85054. And I would suggest to you that without even a passing reference, and I would really advocate without even a priority reference to what the statute commands all of us to do in the 09 legislation, that the plan itself is going to be defective. Again, to say that the Delta's place values must be considered and integrated into all Delta work. I'm just summarizing here in just a really basic way to communicate clearly as best I can. So the closest one that appears to even touch on the statutory section I referred to is action item number 4. And if we turn to that in the draft and look at the priorities, this is section 4 under the priority science action, subsections A, B, and C. None of those appear, to my reading, to address those issues. Now, I do commend you for the fact that after passing this document, which I'm holding up, you passed this, I believe, at your April 13 meeting. I'm sorry I was unable to attend. This document that you passed on, you approved, says that Delta's place is central and has been neglected in the research, which of course it has, and is central to moving forward. Then I look to the plan. It's not there, those ideas are not expressed there as a priority. And of course, you bring that up in one of your overall comments. I appreciate that. I would just ask that in your comments that you not only say this has to be addressed, but also just point out that it's required by statute, and also ask that you, in your comments, track the statutory language. Because I think to the lay reader, the folks that I represent, the folks that I work with the most, it's difficult to read some of these reports, and they speak well to the scientific community, of course, but that's a closed, relatively small group, and it doesn't do well to speak to a larger audience or to communicate what you, I think, at the end of the day, are trying to communicate to the larger audience of people that that are affected. And I heard you talking what I'm going to call an administrative draft, the idea to circulate internally some comments before they come back, by come back, I guess I mean go out to the public. In the business world, when we create a document, sometimes rather complicated documents, and there's binders of documents. When there are changes, in my world, I'm a lawyer, we don't just print out the new docs and say, here, go take a look at it and go figure out where I changed that comma. That could affect your life, by the way. Rather, we put out what's a red line edition. And the red line really helps the reader focus on what the changes are. And to the degree that you communicate with the public, to the degree that you communicate your ideas, your thoughts, your proposals to the public and invite discussion, I would just ask that you use the red line feature. It's a simple turn on button in Word. WordPerfect has a similar feature, and I think that would really be helpful. So that's a practical suggestion. Then I have the statutory set of comments that I made, and I'm happy to entertain any questions. I recognize this isn't a discussion format, but I'll ask for questions anyway. I see nodding heads. I mean, everybody's in agreement. We're all good? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Professor, thank you very much. Thank you.
Any further comments from board members? Additional comments from the public? John?
Yeah, I think in reference to the comment that a red line version would be necessary, we complained with reference to BDCP and earlier drafts of WaterFix that we did not receive a red line version. It seems to me that we need to be paying attention to consistency here.
I think we should on our next 30,000-page review. Do we have another comment on this issue? Okay. Vince, do you have enough guidance on preparing an additional draft? Yes. And then hopefully we'll have that circulate and perhaps it will be suitable for voting on at the June meeting. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Update on California WaterFix, final EIR, EIS review. We have some internal comments on different aspects of that have been circulated around to folks. We're not scheduled to have a presentation on this from the state until July, but given the size of this report, I think it's important for us to start scribbling on it and start forming up our thoughts. We've had some discussion at the last couple of meetings about a need to not only address whether we think the final water fix EIS has addressed all of our previous concerns, but also to have some additional overarching thoughts on the water fix process and the EIS process in particular. I'd like to have a discussion at the board about conceptually, how do you think it is best for us to bring this forward and come up with a useful document as our final review that's legible for real people and useful to real people and to the decision makers. John, you've been drafting some useful words on this.
Well, I could pass this to Dick, who's been drafting even more useful words on it. I think that the question is, well, let me go back. At our last meeting, there was some discussion of having a concluding comments or concluding thoughts section in which we sort of stood back and looked at the whole process that we'd been through in reviewing BDCP, water fix, and by implication, other kinds of reports. And the things that concerned us and frustrated us, and putting some thoughts down in a sense, a more thoughtful way that is not specifically a item-by-item review of what we have been presented with, but a perspective on the process, which had largely to do with issues that should an EIS be slavishly adherent to the minimal requirement of the law, or should it be addressing the factors that really have to do with the underlying purpose, the impacts upon the environment, concerns about whether anything remotely resembling speculation, or which could be translated into thought, could be included or excluded from that. And my feeling, at least, was that it was appropriate to include such thoughts, such perspectives, partly because we were not going to have the opportunity again on something like this because we were dealing with final reports. That also means that whatever we say would not have potentially any effect upon what was written in the final report, but it would be a placeholder. It would be something that would alert anyone who looked at the record of this that there were some overarching concerns, and they required thought, and they required perhaps changes in the way people would go about this, and could be looked upon as providing an opportunity for future preparers of EIS in the Delta or elsewhere to take a step beyond the minimum requirements and address some of these issues, which really have to do with whether or not these things are, as Vince had put in an earlier comment, whether they're addressing the letter of the law or the spirit of the law, whether they're really getting at what we need to know in order to do these things. So that's sort of the genesis of it. Now I think we do need to continue going back and forth upon what has been written. It needs to be trimmed, needs to be tuned. As a board, if this is going to be part of our report, we have to feel comfortable with it. But I would argue that it is appropriate to include something like this in our review, even though it steps beyond the normal purview of our reviews.
Dick, you want to add to that?
Don't have too much to add. I did do some of the initial drafting, I guess a lot of the initial drafting, and John added on. And what we have now, Vince has said, well, this is pretty academic, and, well, we are a science board, but we're trying to communicate a very important message that it may need several forms of communication, and I think that's some of what's ahead of us here. But I did take a perspective of someone who remembers the Trans-Alaska Pipeline impact statement coming out initially with 160 pages for an 800-mile pipeline, and 4 years later is 17 volumes long. And, you know, that's sort of been the story of the impact statement process, that it's just expanded and expanded and expanded to the point where the intent of public participation and involvement has been lost, and to the point where even scientific participation is extremely difficult. And that being the case, you know, in some sense, we're writing to our legislators that this is time to rethink. Since 1969 or 70, 71 for the states. And it's a fair number of years. Maybe there's another cut that needs to be taken now. Or the agencies just need to figure out how to fulfill the court mandates and still do something that's meaningful for public participation and informing the public, because the public cannot read 36,000 pages.
Other board members?
One of the things that I'd written to John was that I thought this would make a wonderful op-ed piece. And we've talked about op-ed pieces for years now, and we've not actually done one. And I thought that this would be a good example of one to come out of the board.
I don't think this is mutually exclusive of doing an op-ed. I think they would, if we were to decide to do an op-ed, we would need to decide how to explore that ground. It would be written in a different way than what we would include in a report, but the themes might well be the same.
You'd certainly have to shorten it to about 800 words for an op-ed. I imagine that I'd be surprised if this body can write something that short.
We'll give it to Brian and then have a table of contents in the beginning.
Right, yeah. And then we might have to lengthen it to get it up to 800 words, actually. But I think the question for the board in my mind is this is stepping a little bit outside of what a normal scientific review of a document is. It asks us to sort of take a look at it as well, as representatives of the science community who are trying to look at science that's serving decision-making in the public. What thoughts do we have on the entire process of the water fix and water fix EAR, EIS? Because this is not the last time that some strategic issue of this magnitude is going to come before the people of California and the decision makers in California, the elected officials and the decision-making bodies. My own thought is that this is a rare opportunity for us to have a useful role in looking at this from a bigger picture. And I'm thankful we have board members that are drafting up this language, but I want to hear from the other board members to make sure that we're not going down someplace they're not comfortable with.
I'm comfortable.
I'm comfortable too. I think at our last meeting, we talked about, just maybe saying some brief words about the opportunities that might be presented through these processes that were maybe missed in this particular case. And, I think that that's not inappropriate for us to do.
I agree with what's been said. It's overwhelming to come into this water fix thing well after it got started and to try to make sense of all of what is in those 90,000 pages that I've heard about. Something has gone awry, and I'm not sure who it serves.
So I recommend that we take the draft. I would recommend that we take the draft that circulated among us last week and circulate it among the entire board.
Okay, that sounds good to me. Tracy?
I mean, I looked at what John and Vince and Dick had been working on, and then I did some, in my mind, clarifying it so that my simple mind could understand it. And I think it makes some really excellent points about this huge volume of information that was generated, some of it extremely useful information, but that was virtually impossible for us, even with our magnificent scientific minds, to get to the bottom of. And we continually made requests for things that would make it much more accessible, both for us and for members of the public and other agencies and institutions. That wasn't done for reasons that were tied back to the requirements of the process. And we're saying, just for a minute, step outside the process and look at what would actually be constructive. As Vince said, what's the spirit of the law? Don't stick with the letter of the law. What would be useful and would inform this process? And so I think for us to say that as clearly as we can, 800 words or 1,600 or whatever, I think we should do that, yes.
Brian?
In our first review of the beta of the VDCP, I can't remember what it was called. It was the draft, not the administrative draft, but the draft. We quoted the law from the Council on Environmental Quality, and it says, environmental impact statements shall be written so that decision makers and the public can readily understand them.
So my feeling is, in our discussions and even what we've been writing, in some ways we're not saying anything different than what we have already said in some previous drafts. How can we say it so we might have more useful effect at this time rather than the previous times we've said this? And I agree, an op-ed might be a good way to do it. Keeping it short, well-written, putting it up front might be useful. But I think if we're really serious about this, it behooves a little bit of more malice of forethought in the sense of how to make this effective, rather than just sounding like a complaint. Because complaints don't really get, they're useful sometimes, but they're not really as useful as they should be. And that means we need to maybe make some more specific suggestions, or at least give some directions for further suggestions without making this long and ponderous and unreadable itself. So, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I have been on the other side of this EIR, EIS sometimes, because in the sense that if you have a large field experiment, you have to get a EIR, EIS done. So one of the things is sometimes people come up with and making unreasonable demands on others, in the sense that there are certain specific aspects have to be met by the EIS, but then you can put a lot of science around it too. So one of the things actually, when we are doing it, because as an independent science board, we have a lot of other science issues which we learn and also we want to communicate. And that should be done as a separate element. So I think it's a very good thing that if you have an op-ed piece or some document which addresses those comments while basically paying attention to what they are supposed to do. And because people who are doing this, let's say a large field experiment, you don't want any more burden than you already have. So that basically can be a kind of a cumbersome process for them if you have all these other comments coming in. So to kind of disassociate them and have as a separate document, I think is a very, very useful thing.
For this overview piece, we have two bits that we've thought about for our comments on the EIR, EAS, this overview piece, and then how well has the final EIR, EAS responded to our previous comments? How do you see, how should we think about putting those pieces together, or as two separate documents? The last time we talked about this, we thought it's better to have one document, and I tend to agree with that. how do you see that, so the one doesn't interfere too much with the other? Just, Joy?
I would say that the general piece is the cover letter, and then the detailed issues are the appendices.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. We need to, I think, flesh out both of those pieces. We still have sort of early drafts, I think, of both of those. Dick?
So I guess I hadn't really thought the board would perhaps issue a 4-page report on the process itself that would be separate from the report on the water fix. But it seems to me there would be tremendous advantages of having it be a separate document, just because it would not be burdened with all the other material on the water fix. And that would not preclude us from also doing an op-ed piece.
I would almost think of it the other way around, that if it's part of our official review of water fix, then it will be read.
This is our review of water fix, BDCP, and our experience generally as scientists in these situations, that we are saying nearly going on 50 years of the National Environmental Policy Act and its state equivalent, and what the courts have done to that at the urging of various stakeholder groups has resulted in a travesty, and that's a statement of science in itself.
John? Thank you.
I think this is something that we'll know it when we see it and have a comfortable feeling about it. I would think for now that including this, what I would call a thought piece or concluding comments or lost opportunities or whatever we want to call it, would fit within our water fix review, not because it's going to have any impact upon water fix, but because the people who decide they want to challenge water fix will have it there as part of the record to inform them. And as I said, I don't think that precludes having it as a separate op-ed. I think issuing something like that as a separate ISB report dooms it to being ignored because it doesn't have the water fix connection to attract attention to it, and it doesn't have any other hook to get people to notice it. So I would argue that we need to at least explore redrafting something, and at the end of the day see how well we feel that it fits with that, and at the same time be exploring the option of an op-ed kind of presentation to get the message across to a much broader and different community.
Brian?
If it's a lessons drawn from this review, this series of reviews, then the specific comments on the final EIR, EIS are likely to include things that we think could have been done better. And some of these may inform the broader piece as to positive suggestions that would go along, that would, so that it's not just a complaint.
Steve?
Yeah, I guess I sort of am agreeing with everyone. I think it should be in two places. Maybe you can have a different emphasis. Maybe in the water fix letter, it's sort of like a missed opportunities. Here's what, because it relates back to the EIR, but in the op-ed, it maybe more futuristic looking. What would you do in the future? How would you do it better? So you can broaden the concept in the op-ed piece.
Steve, do you have any thoughts on this? Since this is going to span the chairs here.
Any thoughts on what?
this will be completed under your watch as chair.
Right. Well, like I say,
Period.
I think it should be written probably initially as the missed opportunities, which has already been sort of drafted. And then I think one could then look at that and see how might one tweak that in an op-ed piece to make it more broadly applied to, anything future that comes down the pipe.
So for moving it forward, I hear we're going to have comments coming back to Martina from the board members on the existing draft, and then she can reflect that back out to the group, those comments back out to the group. That's how we're allowed to do these things under the Brown Act, I understand. And then we will, so that will be for the overview piece. And then I'd like to also have people look at the comments on the responses to our previous comments and have improvements to that also perhaps reflected on to Martina, who can then, we can then take it from there to make sure that progresses along well. Liz?
Sorry, I may have missed something, but I don't think that the full board has even seen the document that's in the works yet.
Didn't it go out to everyone?
Did it? Okay.
Tuesday or Wednesday when I was on the road, it went out and
Oh.
The lost opportunities or?
both. There were two documents attached.
Okay. Sorry, and I looked like a negligent board member.
I thought the same things.
Well, I would think that for this report, that we do have an outline, and we have, I think, 5 different topics, one being adaptive management and so forth. My understanding is that for each of those 5 topics, we only have one individual
Right.
who's assigned to it. It might be useful to maybe team up, so we don't put all the burden on the one individual. So have 2 people dealing with the restoration, 2 people with the levees, and they can take all the comments and compile each of these separate chapters, so to speak, and that might move it.
I think we've already sent them into Jay, though. I know.
Right, and you now have them.
We have drafts of everything now. We have drafts of all of the sections as compiled by one individual who's been in charge of each of those
Right.
sections. Joy was restoration,
Well, that's okay.
and John was adaptive management, and Brian was
Okay,
levies. But now I'm
And that
saying
was what
maybe
was sent
team
out
up
on
and
Tuesday?
do
Yes.
another round.
Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't get it either, or didn't notice it either, Liz.
Yeah. Can we send those back out to make sure everyone has them at the top of their email box? Great.
And Jay, I think it would help to have more of a uniform format for how those comments should be structured.
So I tried to reformat them a little bit
Yeah.
when I put them together. Some of them clearly need to be shortened, and some of them
Right.
clearly need to be lengthened. So I think at this point, since we do have a little bit of time, I would rather have the people that took the first crack at it also lengthen or shorten it a little bit. Because I think for each of these sections, ideally, we would have no more than 2 or 3 pages of our major comments, since this is the final. But if people feel strongly, they can have an appendix to it that goes into more depth. Let's have some individual discussions to identify an additional person to go along with each of these, unless people want to volunteer now. Hearing no volunteers, let's just have some additional
John's
conversation.
going to volunteer.
Oh, John, thank you.
I always do this.
As a second person for each chapter, right?
I'll be happy to work with Joy on the habitat restoration.
Thank you very much. Any other volunteers?
I've already gotten input from Brian on the communications, and I believe I included that in what I wrote. So
Okay,
communication was the easiest one to do.
okay.
Which is why I volunteered to. Oh, shit.
What were those additional areas?
They were levies, long-term effects.
So levies, maybe I'll work with you on levies, Brian?
Long-term effects.
Long-term effects. Long-term effects is an orphan that I restated the comments that we had, but I didn't go any further than that.
So you're talking climate change?
That was one of them. There was a couple of things. Sigma was another one that came in from before.
Who is doing the climate change? That Dick?
We're not sure.
Okay, I mean, I can
Long-term
certainly
effect.
pair up on the climate
Okay.
change issue.
So
Yeah.
let's have you look at the long-term effects
Yeah.
comments that we did before and how it's been evolved. And we had, what was the others?
Mr. Chairman?
Just,
For clarification, you're referring to a document that hasn't been made?
That's correct.
Okay,
That's
good.
correct. This is all our internal early ruminations,
Just
which
wanted
I
to
did
make
not
sure
want
I
to inflict on anybody else.
Didn't miss picking up something on the
No,
tape.
no, you did not.
well, I think we covered them, informative summaries, which was
There's,
Vincent.
if you want to see what this discussion is about, you can look at our 2015, I think September 2015 review of the draft water fix EIR, where our comments fell into these categories.
I see.
And we're just trying to,
Yeah, those are the main categories we had in there, and that's our outline for our response to how well they responded. Yeah.
Yeah, we've reviewed an administrative draft at least once, the draft, and then the recirculated draft. And all of those comments are online.
So the informative summaries, I think now we have Vince and you said Brian was going to help. Long-term effects, what I have is Joe and Jay.
yep.
And levies is Brian and Jay. Restoration is John and Joy. And adaptive management, I'm happy to work with you on that, John.
And then missing content, we had one.
Well, missed opportunities,
No, missing content was the number one. Yeah,
oh, missing content, right.
So I'm not sure who we had for that, but I know we had some comments. So let's,
We have Dick on that.
yes, I think, someone want to,
What you're going missing content is what I think you're saying, then yes, that's,
Well, the missed opportunities you had,
I will work
but,
with John.
yeah,
but then there's another thing called missing content, which I
yeah.
don't.
But I want to make sure we get broader input on that, particularly on that overview piece, than just 2 or 3 authors.
On the missing content, I'm happy to work to govern Dick's
Okay.
base tendencies. So.
You're going to add acid tendencies?
Neutralizes base tendencies.
All right. So let's have some updates to that by the end of this month. To each of those sections, and so Martina, can you please send out both of those sections to all of us? Both of those pieces to all of us, and then everybody identified here will be sending in revisions to those for those sections of the reviews, and they will also be sending in comments. Everyone will be sending in comments on the overview piece to the current piece, and hopefully we'll have all of those then assembled by the beginning of June. And we can at that time decide if we think it's ready for a public version.
So who is our audience or who are the audiences and how do we expect these comments to get used?
My own feeling on the audience for the overview piece is it's the general water community as well as the higher level policy community, the legislators and the executive officers, and perhaps the courts ultimately, but I really don't like writing for that audience. For the other parts, my worry is that we're just showing due diligence. Because this is the final document. And we're not really saying much that we haven't said before.
I think,
Oh, go ahead.
I think because it is the final document, we're not expecting that there will be any further revisions. But we are putting on the record our evaluation and concern with the nature of the final document, and it's available then for anyone who is dissatisfied with the final EIR, EIS, or satisfied with it for that matter.
Right.
And we, again, during this whole process, we were given assurances that many of the things we were bringing up would be dealt with in the final. And so now we are doing the due diligence, as you said, Jay, to go through the final and say, were these things dealt with or not? As a matter of saying, you know, the can was kicked down the road. We've now gone off, we've come to the end of the road, I'll say. I won't say off the cliff,
Right.
but, and we're just saying, were these things that were pushed ever into the future, were they ever dealt with in the final?
Dick?
Yeah, so as I understand it, the Delta Stewardship Council still has to handle this, and we are advising them, and that's the primary audience.
But I also think we have to be careful in our wording, given that this will reappear, that we have to be very judicious in that we are saying exactly what we mean.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's one reason why I wanted to get this started, because this is hopefully our last crack at this one. Any further comments?
Can you clarify what's happening after the May 1st? So what was the process after?
After June 1st.
Okay.
Okay, so everyone's going to make improvements to these documents and get them back to you. And then we will recirculate internally a version of that. I would like to do that in the first week of June if we can. And then I guess the officers will decide whether we think that is worthy of a public draft or whether we want to keep it internal for another round. We're scheduled to have a public presentation to us at the July meeting from the Water Fix people.
I don't think we should waste our time. We're going to be all done with this.
Waste our time in July or with writing this document?
Yeah, I just feel that the official presentation has come so late in the process that we should not be wasting our time with it. We are going to get all of this written and then say we're ready to adjust our comments again. I'm frustrated by the delay.
I'm frustrated by the delay as well.
Well, then I don't think we should cater to it.
It's quite plausible we would have a public draft of our comments before we talk with them. If we come to enough consensus on our thoughts, then we'll have an opportunity to get their reaction to what we think of this.
And what purpose does that serve?
I don't know. I mean, it's public shaming. I don't know.
Okay.
Are you happy with that now? Yeah. It's not, I didn't make the timing decision on it being July. But that's the way I see it playing out, unless we have a better idea.
That July back and forth, if it's informed by our having put out some public comments beforehand and getting some feedback on them, could serve, for instance, to sharpen the, or I don't know, to improve.
Better target our wording.
To improve an op-ed version of it, for instance.
I mean, ideally, if we really want to have this in June, why don't we have the two-day meeting in June instead of in July, and then in July just have a phone call and see if we can get them there then when we're finalizing this?
Well, I don't know that we need a two-day meeting to have them here. We could maybe do the June, maybe have them at the June meeting. I don't know if it could be done on a call or WebEx or something like that.
I think you get better discussions with people in person rather than telephone. And this is one of the biggest things, and it's in statute that we look at it, so I almost don't see it plausible, but, you know, starting June, I'm not the chair anymore, so.
You're the chair now, though. Well, in July, we had we're scheduled to have a face-to-face, and I know that there's been some work done because we were going to be at the Delta King for a retreat sort of a thing. I don't have any problem. I personally have no problem in moving it to June, but I don't know what the schedules or what the staff are, or whether they would even be available by June.
Yeah, it might be hard to rearrange people's schedules that hadn't been planning on traveling for that time frame, but I'm perfectly happy to see it change.
Jane, Steve, it just seems that having them meet with us after we've issued a public document, it doesn't make any sense. If we wanted to meet with them to actually ask about things, to have a draft among us, that would seem to me the logical thing to do.
Then maybe we don't have a public draft until after we meet with them.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah.
All right. But I don't want us to stop working on it. Okay.
I think it's, as you've said, this is one of the most important things we do, so I think particularly since this is sort of our final, I don't want to use the right adjectives that come to mind on this. This is our final writing on this. We want to make sure that we do get it right. Partly because we have to be aware it may be subject to legal proceedings, and therefore, as Vince has said, words matter. So taking that extra time, getting that feedback, if we get the feedback, then we can say, well, this simply confirms everything we thought all along, which has been the case with our previous episodes. Or we can say, well, no, this changes everything, so we want to revise it. I think we need to leave that option open to us. Yeah. And if there's no rush in getting out our final version, then we ought to be a little bit more leisurely about it.
That sounds fine with me. I just want to get the sense of the board.
Well, I'm just wondering if we should explore whether or not having the presentation and an in-person meeting in June is feasible, if it is feasible. Because if we wait until July to take these next steps until we have the presentation and discussion, then we are delaying, and if we can do it in June, let's do it in June. But if we can't, then what I'm hearing is we delay. I can do it.
But by doing it in June, you mean having an in-person meeting in June?
Yes.
Okay. What's the date for the June meeting is?
13th.
The 13th.
I need to vote against. Well, I can't participate in person in June.
Okay. I can certainly make it, June 13th.
Jay, we haven't checked with DWR on their availability in June because we assumed that it wouldn't be in June. So we would need to do a little work to find out.
Yeah, but while we have everybody here, let's see about our availability in June. Because if we can encourage them to move it up to June, and we're willing to do that, then what do we get to lose?
So are you suggesting we come in for June for our 2-day meeting and do a phone call in July, or come in just for the 1 day for this and keep July going? So is it just the 13th, or is it?
I think it's really awkward to have an in-person meeting in June, given the other things we want to accomplish and the timing. I can see more ways that it's unlikely to work out than it is likely to work out. The people that have to travel the farthest, how likely are you to come in for a 1-day meeting?
Now, in my case, I will be on travel, so I won't be able, I was going to join in over the phone.
So Liz, how's that for you? The 13th of June.
So we're talking about just a 1-day meeting?
If it's a 1 or a 2-day meeting, but probably, I don't know that we would want to accelerate the retreat up to that as well, and so.
I guess if they could meet with us in June, I feel like that would be important enough to bring me out here.
Okay. Joy?
Well, it becomes a 3-day commitment to do that, whether it's 1 day or 2 days.
That's why I'm asking you,
Right.
yeah.
I left my calendar at home, so I don't know for sure.
So Martina, can you send a email out asking for people as to whether they can do that? I suspect that this is not going to work out, but maybe we can see if we get lucky. Or we can revisit this tomorrow, actually, after you've had a chance to look at your calendar.
So one question, I go back to Tracy again. Is it, we could do it and try and do this in June, or we could just wait till July and just spend more time putting together the drafts that we have and get back to Vince's original comment about not rushing through?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
I think that's fine, too.
Yeah,
I withdraw the motion.
Okay. Let's do that then. Good. But that'll give us another couple of turns at our drafts, which I think will be worthwhile.
So I'm thinking now that we have 2-person teams, writing teams, I think it's still worthwhile for everybody to look at all sections and send those comments to the 2-person team, individual comments on any section you feel you want to comment on.
And to Martina, she's going to be our central repository for things.
By your May 30th?
Yeah, we will craft all that, get it done. Okay. Any additional comments? So we have. Okay, we've got the jackpot. We've got 2 public speakers on this item. So let's have Michael Brodsky from Save the California Delta Alliance.
Correct. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to say we've been involved in the struggles over the tunnels and various Delta issues for many years. Most of our membership lives in Discovery Bay, which is a waterfront community, so we're in the Delta, we're boating, we represent small businesses, tour boat operators, people who are sort of ordinary, real Delta people. We even have the mailman who delivers mail by boat as one of our members. So, and one thing that stands out about the Delta Independent Science Board is that in all this process and all this controversy, I think the ISB is the one institution that people trust and people respect. We may not agree with every sentence and every colon and every period, but in general, we think you're dedicated to science and that you do good science and you call it like you see it. And so it's been very frustrating to us to see that what we see as the existential issue about the Delta, which is BDCP, now California Water Fix, that you're not able to have any influence on those decisions, on those policymakers. And I know that you've expressed your frustration. I've read your various reviews. And for a scientific body like yourselves to use words like "we're appalled that you've had so much time to do this and you haven't done it yet," and it's amazing that there's a lack of this or that. In one case, I think you were so frustrated that you felt compelled to draw a graph to show them this is what a graph looks like.
Yeah.
Okay, so. Like many,
thank you for acknowledging that you feel our pain.
So like many of you, I teach an undergraduate class in legal studies. We do a lot of environmental stuff, and I would say that most of my undergraduates are better capable of producing a document than what we see in the BDCP EIR. What concerns me today is that I hear sort of an air of resignation and defeat among the ISB members, that it's too late to influence this project, and what we're really doing is we're commenting on the overall sad state of the EIR, EIS process, and maybe as a result of our actions, the general field of environmental review will get better in the future. And I don't think we're at that point yet. You've talked about producing multiple drafts and a short version and a long version and maybe a medium version. And you've talked about the frustration with the delay of DWR getting back to you in July. So one observation about that DWR has to come and make, I assume it's DWR or USBR, to come and make a presentation in order for you to finish your comments on the EIR, is that the EIR is supposed to be an explanatory document that policymakers can pick up and read and understand what the project is and what the effects are. And if they need to come in person and make a 2-day presentation, then obviously the document is still a failure. In terms of you having an impact, and I will admit to being a lawyer, I'll plead guilty to that. The most important thing is to get some form of your comments into them very soon. So what I see going on is that they are delaying you past July. By that time, they will have issued their record of decision. And the law on that is once they issue the record of decision, they're not required to consider any of your comments. If you submit comments before they issue the record of decision, then they're required by law to consider those and to respond to them. So I realize it puts you in a difficult position because you want to do a good job, you want to do a thorough job, you don't want to shoot from the hip. But I think something is in order from you to state that the document is at this point still a failure as an informational document, and maybe a couple of examples, and that you're working on a fuller explanation, and perhaps with a simple request, if they want to interact with you, for them to agree not to issue their record of decision until you've had a chance to further interact. Because that allowing them to delay you, issue the record of decision, and then your comments come in, they have effectively taken you out of the process, and we would really hate to see that happen. I think a few things are obvious about it. One of the things that you've been from day one pointing out to them is the lack of an adaptive management plan. I think you used the words, we're not looking for a primer on adaptive management. We're looking for a real adaptive management plan. And they still don't have an adaptive management plan. What they have is a promise to put together some really good funding and some really good people and some really good committees and work really hard and get to an adaptive management plan. But the concrete triggers and a concrete description of actions that those thresholds would trigger is still not there. And I don't, absent a strong statement from this ISB, or our last hope, I think what will happen is that the construction will be approved, and about 5 years into tunnel construction, then an adaptive management plan will be produced, and it's kind of too late at that point. Another observation is that a number of members here talked about missed opportunities. So in lawyer language, we call that a failure to consider a reasonable range of alternatives. And they have certainly failed to consider any kind of a portfolio approach. We in the Delta, I mean, we're going to be wiped out by this thing. And when we think about the fact that about 2.5 million acre-feet of water a year goes to irrigate almonds, and that almonds consume about 26 times more than most other crops, and just by switching from almonds to lettuce or beans or strawberries, our communities wouldn't have to be decimated. We find it hard to understand. In other words, that gets you a savings of 1.5 million or so acre-feet a year.
I don't know if that's true as a statement of fact. But, no, in terms of acreage, that I think those numbers might be correct, but in terms of use per acre, you might want to look at some of those numbers.
Well,
Sorry to interrupt.
I would like to do that, and if there would be any way I could submit what I have and get some feedback, or
anyway, but
because we see that. I mean, that figure comes up over and over.
But you do
again.
have some good points. Let me just let you continue. I'm sorry.
Let's say conservation. Also, I heard a number of comments about that while they may be meeting the minimum requirement of the law, and that courts have gotten to the point where they're requiring such an exhaustive thing that they may be meeting the letter of the law, but they're missing the spirit of the law. Well, they're not meeting the letter of the law either. You know, and on the recirculated draft, U.S. EPA, who is federally, statutorily charged with judging the legal adequacy of environmental impact statements, gave that environmental impact statement a rating of 3, which is a failing grade. And so they said, this does not meet the requirements of the letter of the law. In most cases, in all cases that I know of where that happens, they have to do a recirculated draft. But in this case, they didn't. They said, we'll wait and we'll fix everything in the final draft. And now we get to the final draft and it's not fixed, and there's nothing anybody can do, perhaps except you. So I also think in terms of the missed opportunities, if we were to state the problem as the way we currently export water is harmful to the Delta and makes our water system unreliable, and then we were to say we have $30 billion to spend, would we spend it all on building 3 new intakes and 2 tunnels? And I think the answer to that would probably be no. There are other things that we could do. There are other alternatives that could and should be considered. So I guess my takeaway point is to urge you to do something soon, so they're forced to listen to you and to respond to you. Don't give up. You can influence the project. And I would just like to, I wrote you a letter on April 12th, and with some pictures last meeting. And my point in writing the letter was not to try to inappropriately influence you or get you to put something in the comments that you don't come to as your own independent conclusion, but rather because this thing is 30,000 pages or 36,000 pages, to point out some things, and I did cite specific page numbers as sort of a guide just to lead you to look at that particular thing in the document. And if I could just pass out this. So we've focused a lot on our comments, and I know ISB has focused a lot on environmental impacts, on the hydrology, on the ecology, and so forth, and you're now just starting to talk about Delta's place, which we think is good. And one of the things that I think even by itself makes the Twin Tunnel project not a good answer for the Delta is the way that those three intakes are sited. The three intakes and all the associated construction facilities are right next to the towns of Hood and Clarksburg, and that's approximately a 6-mile-long construction zone. Hood is a legacy community, a Delta legacy community. It's a very cute little town. If you're heading back towards Sacramento after you leave here, if you go to the other side of the river and head towards Sacramento, you'll drive right through it. I think you can see by looking at the map there the size of the construction site and the enormity of it, and the fact there'll be about 4,000 construction workers in that area. Hood is not going to survive. And Clarksburg is just across the river. The construction area is about 10 times the size of the town. And I think what I would say is that in making decisions about where to locate the intakes, impact on adjacent communities was not one of the considerations, and it should have been. The intakes, even if we are to have tunnels, the intakes don't need to be in the most scenic and historic part of the Delta. And I just think they never even looked at that. I know I'm taking up a lot of time here, so I'll pass out one more, which also shows the intensity of the impacts of construction on one of the prime recreation areas of the Delta and one of the tunnel muck dumps. And I think the point of this, bringing up this impact on Delta's place and impact on recreation, is to say that perhaps the tunnels will have some beneficial effect on mitigating reverse flows in Old and Middle River and will help smelt survival. On the other hand, the most recent aquatic science peer review says it was going to create reverse flows in the North Delta, and that it will create other water quality problems. So it's in no means any perfect solution to flow issues in the Delta. And then if you add to that the impact that this huge construction project has on us, on our lives in the Delta, I think that's an important consideration in the scale. Is this the alternative, or is it something else? And so far, I don't think the impact on us as a community and all this construction has really been considered, and I hope you'll think about that. And I thank you for your time. I also am happy to answer any questions if it would be useful.
Questions from board members?
Do you know anything specific about the record of decision, the timetable, and?
What's happening right now, our best understanding is that NMFS is holding out for a little bit more, that on the biological opinions, they've satisfied U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but that they haven't satisfied NMFS, and that we're looking probably about June 15th for a record of decision. It could come before that, but that's our best understanding.
Dick?
Yeah, I would just like to remind the board that we have the power of attorney, or power of subpoena, and we can subpoena DWR, and we could have subpoenaed DWR 6 months ago. And this idea that we're waiting for them on their convenience is inappropriate. Stephen said that when we first met.
Wow.
That changes the whole game.
We can up our game like to a whole level of, well, this just boggles my mind. I don't think like, I mean, this is.
There is another alternative also. You can request the United States Environmental Protection Agency to direct them to keep the comment period open and delay issuing the ROD, and US EPA has the power to do that. I asked EPA to do that on power for our little citizens group, and they said, well, you're not a state or federal agency. But that's another option.
There will be some other decision processes that are coming up. Certainly, this is going to have to go through the state board, and it's very likely, I think, to go to the Delta Stewardship Council for consideration. And my impression has been that those decision processes will happen well after we've completed our report. So it's not giving up on our part, but it's more making sure that we're providing useful comments for those other decision processes. But I might have it wrong.
No, you are correct about that. That DSC will probably be, if it gets to DSC, will be after the water board and other processes. But the water board and DSC have limited ability to influence the direction of the project or to ask them to consider alternatives. For instance, water board has to determine under the statutory criteria whether or not there's any injury to legal users of water downstream, and that has some very specific statutory definitions. And they really don't have the power to say that there are better alternatives that you should have considered. There's also the fact that the Water Board and Delta Stewardship Council, and despite the quality of your scientific input, if they don't have a good, decent EIR in front of them, which there's no reason why they shouldn't fix that darn thing and just do it right, it hobbles their ability to make good decisions. I mean, I was at the Delta Stewardship Council meeting last month, and one of the council members, I was making some point, and one of the council members was saying, well, but we've got this 30,000 page EIR. And then everybody in the meeting disagreed on what was in the EIR. And so I think if you get something in and take some action before that record of decision, all your efforts in commenting on this EIR will not have gone to waste. But as it is, they really haven't listened to anything you've said, and I don't think they should be allowed to get away with that. Well, one other thing I wanted to mention is that, and that may be hidden, and the kind of thing I wanted to point out to you in your review, because I've spent so much time with these documents, is that they're redefining the export to inflow ratio as a constraint on exports in the summertime. So in D1641, the export to inflow ratio plays a big role in limiting exports during the summer months, because during the summer months we don't have the fall X2 requirement, we don't have the spring pulse requirement, we don't have a lot of the requirements of the fish agencies. And what they're doing is they're excluding the water that is diverted through the North Delta intakes from the export term. So if in August you're exporting 10,000 cubic feet per second from the new intakes and 1,000 cubic feet per second from the south intakes, then for purposes of that calculation, you're only exporting 1,000 cubic feet per second. And so the only thing that's restraining this thing in the summer, and this is what we're afraid of, is the two operating criteria, which is the 5,000 CFS bypass at the intakes and a requirement for 3,000 CFS at Rio Vista. So we, and D1641, but they're changing that term in D1641. So we have this fear that we could have a flow of 18,000 cubic feet per second, say in August, and they're taking 6,000 out from those North Delta intakes because it doesn't count as a part of the export to inflow ratio. And then us downstream, we're out of luck. So I think that should be addressed. They shouldn't just be allowed to do that in a footnote somewhere. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Additional questions, comments? Right?
Just a quick question.
Yep.
Shouldn't we contact DWR and get some kind of idea about these decision points, like the records of the records of decision, those points which they are going to make? Might be useful.
I think we should check into that, yeah.
You could certainly ask them, you know, you guys have scheduled this meeting with us for July. We assume then you're not going to issue record of decision until after that, and see what they say.
Yeah, we're probably not very well qualified as lawyers for these kind of maneuvers. But I do think we should check up on these a little bit.
Jim, what I'd suggest, you know, your comments were very, very useful, and they really fit into our open public meeting that we're having tonight, is that we delay any further discussion on this till we have a chance to sleep on it and hear especially from other people later tonight
I think that's very
about
wise.
that.
Yeah, very good.
I would comment that the Stewardship Council does have legal people, and it is entirely within our purview to ask the Stewardship Council legal staff to look into this.
Right. And maybe we could subpoena them if we feel we need to. Yeah. Thank you very much.
You also have access to the Attorney General's office to issue an opinion on any question you have, as well as in-house counsel.
Thank you. Bob Wright from Friends of the River. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and board members. It is a pleasure to be here. I just have really several things to say very, very briefly. Friends of the River is one of 10 public interest organizations that have been on several recent joint letters to the Delta Stewardship Council, and through Martina Kohler, we have transmitted copies of those letters to you in March and April. Those letters related to a little bit different subject than what you're discussing right now. It's to the proposed Delta Plan Amendment on conveyance, but we thought that there might be some things in there, perhaps of a legal nature, that might be helpful to you in your review of the Waterfix EIR-EIS. I've listened very carefully to your discussion, and I think the real reason this Waterfix EIR-EIS has expanded, and as you said in your comments back in September of 2015, was really not useful to either the public or the decision makers, is because they did not set out to do what they were supposed to do, including under our laws, the National Environmental Policy Act and the California Environmental Quality Act, both the spirit and the letter of those laws. The centerpiece of those laws weren't passed to make agencies write long documents. They really weren't. The focus of them was alternatives, to come up, what is the best way for the environment to do something? That's pretty straightforward. And this goes way back to May of 2011. I think it is an appropriate subject for scientists because the National Academy of Sciences did their review of an early administrative BDCP draft, and their conclusion was they didn't look at any alternatives, and I can quote some of the language from that, the agencies put the cart before the horse. Now, one could do, I think, a comprehensive, intelligible, understandable EIR-EIS if they set out to really look at a reasonable range of reasonable alternatives. And you can start right with the law, the Delta Reform Act, and don't get worried, I'm only going to cite one section. 85320B2B talks about, this is under the Delta Reform Act, doing a comprehensive review and analysis of a reasonable range of Delta conveyance alternatives, including through Delta, dual conveyance, and isolated conveyance. And I've been through those documents. I'm not a scientist. I'm a lawyer, as Mike Brodsky. There is no comprehensive review and analysis of a through Delta, the existing, which we already have, not without any problems, but we have it. And that would be the basis for considering modern 21st century things to reduce exports, to actually increase freshwater flows through the Delta, which I think it's fair to say that some recent documents issued by the State Water Resources Control Board in the fall of 2016 called for, well, yeah, we really have to increase freshwater flows through the Delta. And sometimes we all have to, maybe even scientists and lawyers have to step back. Okay, there are a lot of trees out there, but we really do need to look at the forest. And when you build intakes upstream, that means less fresh water is going to flow through the Delta that's going to be taken through those tunnels. And yet we have a lot of scientific opinion out there from these various agencies that the Delta needs more fresh water flowing through it. So the suggestion we of Friends of the River would, with all due respect, make to you is that in this review you're doing and these comments you're going to put together in your review of the EIR, EIS, is that it is fair and reasonable for you to address if you conclude that they really haven't done the job, either meeting the letter or spirit of the law with respect to considering a reasonable range of alternatives, as opposed to just all it really is has become is a construction project EIR. A lot of intakes and big tunnels, smaller intakes, maybe different locations. Yeah, those are project alternatives. But we're talking about the Delta Stewardship Council, the Delta Reform Act, and what's supposed to be a comprehensive long-term management plan for the Delta. And I really think, we think, that you have a very broad scope, and it is fair for you to address, as scientists, in the review you're going to be doing, whether the documents before the public in the EIR, EIS have done the job in terms of airing out what is, we all know is very controversial between keeping through Delta conveyance or going to new dual conveyance, including these water-fixed tunnels. Well, that's really the job. The fact that it's controversial doesn't mean that it's not supposed to be there in the EIR, EIS. And it's getting late, and we probably all need a little break, especially you. And I'm happy to respond to any questions and also say, if it's proper under your rules for anybody to contact us about letters we've sent to you and ask us questions, we're more than happy to respond. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you. Additional questions from board members? We've got another card and letter coming in. Barbara Daly from Clarksburg.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak to all of you. I live in the Delta. I have raised my family in the Delta. I've been here for over 25 years. I know the Delta very well. I've started a tourist business in order to educate people about the Delta. I call the Delta a place of community, history, and nature. And that's what I've learned about the Delta in living here. And I don't see all of those three things being addressed properly in the EIR and the EIS. They're kind of being glazed over and pushed to the side. I live right across from the intake that's supposed to be planned to go in across from Clarksburg. My well will be severely impacted, as well as my neighbor's well. I won't be able to stay there. The EIS says that some people will abandon buildings, and that's that is what would have to happen to me. I wouldn't have a choice. And if I even could bring in bottled water, I wouldn't be able to stand the air quality. It would be it wouldn't be breathable from all of the construction, and the noise level would be deafening from the pile driving. And not only me, not only my family, but all of my neighbors as well. And that goes north of me and south of me. So I was really going to wait to speak with you tonight between 4 and 7, but I'm taking this opportunity to tell you that Mr. Brodsky handed out a map, and my home is on that map. So it'll be deeply affected by what you're seeing there. And also, I don't know if this is the right time or not, but I have done a study on the Delta. And I've submitted it as an EIS comments. I have a copy for you if you like it now or later. And I have all kinds of information about all the human activities that are going on here in the Delta, and what a wonderful place it is. So it just, nobody knows about it. That's the problem. So I'm dedicated to help people learn about it, to help teach you about it if you'd like to know more. And I have a bus, it seats 14 people, and I'd be happy to take you out and show you around and show you the places. I know you went to the Dutra Museum, but there's many other museums and many places of interest. So may I give this to you now, or should I wait till this evening?
You're certainly welcome to leave it with us now.
Leave it with you, Martina?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yes, please.
All right, thank you so much,
Thank
and
you.
I'll wait for the evening as well.
Very good. Thank you very much. Any additional public comment? Any additional comments from the board? Sure.
Hi, my name is Joseph Rizzi, and I'm an inventor. And when they were talking about alternatives, that's what I was wanting to tell other people, and I also wanted to make sure that this board understood that there are alternatives that they haven't considered. The Clifton Court forebay is a very easy situation where they can fix that to actually stop it from being a fish death trap. Because the Clifton Court forebay, it holds almost 2 to 3 days worth of water. If they actually just change the levee on it to be in a fish screen, it's a 1.5 mile levee. If they change that levee to be a fish screen, they would no longer have any take or killing of fish in order to export the water. That's putting the environment first. That's really what you're wanting to do. This is one of the things that they don't look at. They also don't look at taking the water from the center of the river instead of just taking it from all the water as it comes in at you. I document on their up screens. It's basically trying to take the water from the center and allowing it to go over a sill. That way you can shut off the water very quickly by making that sill higher. And you do it by using flexible hoses. Using the water that you already have available. You fill up the hose, it expands it and makes it bigger. You can make a quick and easy wall in order to stop the water from coming into the Clifton Court forebay. And by doing that, you're actually allowing, you can actually vary when you're filling the Clifton Court forebay. You want to fill the Clifton Court forebay when at night when the fish are asleep. So you can fill the Clifton Court forebay at night and then have the delta flows all restored during the daytime. It's a very easy concept to get at. And you can actually at the same time be able to fill or pump 24/7. Because again, Clifton Court forebay becomes not only a forebay but also a reservoir. You can deepen the Clifton Court forebay for more storage, but you're also keeping all of the fish and all of the aquatic life in the delta where it's supposed to be. Now, when you're filling the Clifton Court forebay, you will be moving fish into that area. But the nice thing is during the day, they'll all go back where they're supposed to be. You don't have all the predation that you would have today. If you look at that map I gave you, you look at where the intakes are right now. There's 5 intakes of 20 feet across. That's 100 feet of intake. There is, in that 10,000 cubic feet per second, no wonder it becomes a death trap to all small fish. There's no way they can get out of there. Then they have to go through the fish screens where 30% of them die. And then they have to be trucked to some other location where they're dropped off and eaten. I mean, this is just a horrible mess. If you keep all of the fish out of the Clifton Court forebay, you can shut down the Skinner Fish Facility, because now all of a sudden all of the water in Clifton Court forebay is fish free after they stop killing them out of their normal process. But then you can also get all of the water from move the Central Valley Project, taking its water from the Clifton Court forebay, and then you can shut down the Tracy fish processing plant, if you wish. I sort of consider it that.
Salvage facility, I think they call it.
Salvage facility is a good word for it, yes. It's looking at what are they trying to do. Yes, they have studied about fish screens for Clifton Court forebay. They were actually promised to have fish screens for Clifton Court forebay. They never done it. They've always considered very small areas of where to put small fish screens throughout around Clifton Court forebay. This is 1.5 miles. This is 6 times the size of what they are now proposing for the water fix in one location. This is the whole idea, is to make the fish screens large enough to actually no longer kill the fish. Now, at some point in time, you've fixed the 2 main problems that you're dealing with. One is killing fish, and if you don't kill fish, you can export more water. You return the flows during the day, which is 2/3 of every day. That's pretty darn good. But what happens when you start pumping too much water? You're still going to have the problem with the salt. Now, that's where on the reverse side of the page I handed out is how you deal with the salt. You work with where I live, Benicia, where all the water goes by. What do? You don't put a barrier. You don't put a dam. That's not what I'm asking for or even wanting anybody to consider. Yes, they have considered those in the past, and I am not a favor of any kind of a dam. But what you're looking at is, where does water come in? Where does the salt water come in? Salt water comes in through the shipping channel the most. Why? Because salt water is heavy. Salt water is going to seek the lowest point coming through. So the number one thing we need to do is put a lock system, not to raise or lower a ship in the delta. No, we want to stop where the salt water is coming in the most intrusive. But not only that, I've talked to bar pilots who ferry these large vessels through the Benicia area. That is a hazardous area. Because of the way it is shaped, sort of like a half horseshoe, it creates some horrible currents in that direction. I want to protect all 3 of those bridges from being hit like the Casco Poussant. I mean, I'd hate to see some kind of an oil spill with the flows going up to the delta and pollute the whole delta. That would be ecologically horrible. I mean, that's it. That's where you want to look at where is the best thing. And what I suggest on either side of the lock system are louvers, not a barrier. I want to make sure that the delta is never flooded. If you put a barrier in, you got to watch it. You got to make sure that all the outflows go out correctly. But if you have it as a tidally controlled louvers, as the fresh water goes out, the louvers come open, just like a dryer vent. When the salt water comes in, they all shut down. You do that to half of the delta, or excuse me, half of the bridge. It's 1 mile across. You're only talking about half of it. So you leave half of it open all of the time for fish. Humphrey the whale can come by and visit, no problem. You keep the delta, you want to keep it open for traffic. According to the study of DWR back in 1963, it only takes 1.3 million acre feet in order to naturally hold back the salt water at a specific point in the straits. These are things that people have lost, understanding that it is possible to keep the straits open and environmentally friendly. These are things that you want to be able to consider and promote. The channel is set up the way it is. If you put in the diversion on the or block the southern part of the bridge, you will actually end up shunting the water force from the Pacific Ocean into Grizzly Bay, where it can't get into the delta very well. It's going to have a really hard time. The X2 factors for all of the delta will become very great. I mean, you want to have more of a freshwater environment, but leave it open for the fish. That's what I'm looking at. And I keep trying to tell people, and this was my opportunity to tell you guys, so I was really happy for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Any questions? Thank you very much for
Thank you.
interesting ideas. Are there additional people that would like to speak with us? We have another opportunity. We'll be talking about Delta's place tonight, so without any further ado, I adjourn the meeting for now, and we'll reopen in just a wee bit.